The best part of my week was the lie. It began around 10 a.m. on a Sunday, when the sun would slant through the blinds of Brian's apartment, striping the rumpled duvet in gold. It smelled of Hima, mix of clean laundry, the expensive soap he'd used, and the faint lingering scent of the whiskey we'd shared the night before. This was our sanctuary, a third-floor walk-up in a part of the city he'd chosen, specifically because no one he knew ever came here, our own private, temporary world. I'd wake up first, almost always. I liked to watch him sleep, in repose. The guarded tension he carried during the week would melt away. His face, usually set in a charming but carefully controlled smile, would go slack and boyish. A stray piece of his dark, thick hair would fall across his forehead, and his breathing would be a deep, steady rhythm against my back. In these moments, it was easy to pretend that this was real, that I was his and he was mine, and that was the whole story. This Sunday was no different. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and pulled on one of his gray university sweatshirts that hung loosely on my frame. In the small kitchen, I started the coffee maker, the gurgling sound a familiar and comforting part of our ritual. I knew exactly where he kept the mugs, the sugar, and the specific blend of dark roast he preferred. I knew the faulty burner on his stove and the squeak in the third floorboard by the fridge. I knew the geography of his private life better than anyone. I just wasn't on the map of his public one. Morning, a sleepy voice mumbled from the doorway. I turned, a smile instantly finding my lips. Brian was leaning against the doorframe, shirtless, wearing only a pair of plaid pajama pants. He scrubbed a hand over his face, his eyes still soft with sleep. "Morning," I said, pouring coffee into his favorite chipped blue mug. "There's a fresh pot." He patted over and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. His skin was warm, and I leaned back into his embrace, closing my eyes, soaking in the feeling of being held. This was the currency I was paid in, these stolen moments of domesticity, of unguarded affection, and for a long time, I'd convinced myself I was rich. "You're the best," he murmured into my neck, his lips brushing my skin. A shiver traced its way down my spine. What would I do without you? The question hung in the air, innocent on his part, but loaded with a painful irony for me. The truth was, he did just fine without me. He did just fine from Sunday afternoon until the following Saturday night. We took our coffee to the small balcony that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. We didn't talk much. We never needed to in these moments. We just existed together, our shoulders pressed close, our hands wrapped around warm mugs. It was a perfect picture of a couple in love, a picture no one would ever see. The lie began to unravel, as it always did, around noon. It started with his phone, which he always kept face down on the nightstand. It buzzed once, a low, intrusive sound that sliced through our quiet bubble. I sewed his shoulders tense almost imperceptibly. He ignored it, but then it buzzed again, and again. He sighed, a sound of pure resignation, and untangled himself from me. I should probably see what that is. I just nodded, taking a sip of my coffee, my eyes fixed on a pigeon strutting along the telephone wire across the street. I didn't need to look at him. I knew the routine. I knew the way his expression would shift. The charming boyfriend I had in private, morphing into the preoccupied friend he had to be for the outside world. He came back a minute later, phone in hand, not looking at me. "That was Chloe," he said, his voice now carefully neutral. "She's wondering when I'm heading back. We're having lunch with her parents." Chloe, her name was a ghost that haunted our perfect Sundays. I had never met her, but I knew everything about her. I knew she had long blonde hair from the one photo I'd accidentally seen on his unlocked phone months ago. I knew she was a pediatric nurse. I knew her parents adored Brian. I knew she was the beautiful, socially acceptable truth that made me the ugly, necessary secret. "Oh, right," I said, my own voice just as neutral. I was an expert at this part. The graceful exit, the understanding smile. "You should get going then. You don't want to be late." "Yeah," he said, still not meeting my eyes. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I knew all too well. "I'm sorry, Leo. I wish." He always let the sentence hang there, unfinished. "I wish things were different. I wish I was braver. I wish I didn't have to do this. I used to fill in the blanks myself. a little game of hope and self-delusion. Now, I just let the silence answer for him. The next 20 minutes were a carefully choreographed dance of departure. He'd shower while I got dressed, erasing my presence from his apartment. I'd fold the sweatshirt I'd worn and place it back in his drawer. I'd wash our coffee mugs and put them away, leaving the kitchen exactly as I'd found it. By the time he came out of the bathroom, smelling of that expensive soap and dressed in jeans and a crisp polo shirt, his Chloe-approved outfit was just a visitor. A friend who was on his way out. He walked me to the door. This was the hardest part, the final transaction. He'd pull me into a tight hug, his last moment of genuine affection before he put his mask back on. "I'll text you," he whispered into my hair, his voice full of a regret that I knew was real, but also useless. "Okay," I whispered back. Into his chest, he pulled away and gave me that charming smile. The one he gave his boss, his parents, and probably Chloe. "Drive safe, man." Man. The word that demoted me from his lover to his friend in a single syllable. He held the door open, and I stepped out into the hallway, into the real world where I didn't fit into his life. I didn't look back as I walked down the stairs. I never did, because if I did, I might see the relief on his face. And that was a truth even I wasn't strong enough to handle. The lie, as painful as it was so much easier to live with. My car, parked 3 blocks away as a standard precaution, felt like a decompression chamber. As soon as I clicked the door shut, the persona I wore for Brian, the easygoing, understanding lover who asked for nothing, began to dissolve. The drive home was always the same. I'd turn on the radio, blasting some loud, angry music to fill the sudden cavernous silence. I'd grip the steering wheel until my knuckles were white, my jaw clenched against a scream that was always lodged. Just below my collarbone, the transition back to my own life was jarring. My apartment, a small but sunny space above a flower shop, was my territory. It was filled with my books, my half-finished canvases, my clutter. Unlike Brian's meticulously neutral space, my apartment was unabashedly mine. And yet, every Sunday afternoon, it felt like a foreign country. I would walk in and feel like a ghost in my own home, the scent of his soap still clinging to my skin, the memory of his touch a phantom limb. I scrubbed the rest of the day in a haze of avoidance. I scrubbed my small bathroom until the tiles gleamed. I did 3 loads of laundry. I repotted a dying succulent. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from replaying the morning. Anything to keep from thinking about him sitting at a polished mahogany table, laughing at a joke told by Chloe's father, his hand resting casually on her knee. The text always came around 9 p.m. Punctual, predictable. "Brian, hey, just got home. Long day. Hope yours was good." My fingers hovered over the screen. In the early days, a year and a half ago, this text would have been a lifeline, a jolt of pure relief that washed away the misery of the day. It was proof. He was thinking of me. We were still on. Now it felt more like a courtesy, a box he had to check before he could go to sleep with a clear conscience. Me. It was fine, productive. Glad you're home. I kept my answers short, non-committal. I'd learned early on that asking questions was a mistake. How was lunch? How were her parents? Those questions were landmines. They led to answers I didn't want to hear, details that would add flesh and bone to the faceless ghost of Chloe, making her more real and my own position more precarious. It was better not to know. It was safer in the dark. Our relationship, if you could call it that, existed in a carefully compartmentalized geography. There were his safe zones, his apartment, a handful of dive bars on the far side of town, the occasional late-night movie in a suburban multiplex where the chances of running into someone he knew were slim to none. Then there was the rest. Of the world, the entire map of his real life, which was a minefield for us. He was a junior architect at a prestigious downtown firm. A world of sharp suits, client dinners, and after-work drinks at trendy bars I would never be invited to. He came from a well-to-do family in the suburbs, the kind with a country club membership and deeply entrenched traditional values. His life was a series of glass houses, and I was the stone he kept hidden in his pocket. We had met, ironically, through a mutual friend at a party. A real party in the minefield. I was there with my friend Mark, and Brian was there with Chloe. I remember seeing him across the room, laughing, a pint of craft beer in his hand. He was handsome in a way that seemed both classic and modern, with kind eyes and a smile that looked completely genuine. I felt a pull, the familiar, hopeless tug towards someone unattainable, and I'd immediately dismissed it. But later that night, I'd been on the back porch getting some air, and he had come out alone. He'd asked me for a light, even though he wasn't a smoker. We started talking about art, about music, about the crushing boredom of corporate life. For 10 minutes, we existed in a bubble. There was a spark, an undeniable current of chemistry that hummed between us. Then Chloe had appeared in the doorway, a beautiful silhouette against the warm light of the party. "Brian, we're leaving," she'd called out. The change in him was instantaneous. The open, engaged man I'd been talking to vanished, replaced by a tense, polite stranger. "Coming, honey," he'd said, giving me a quick, panicked look. Before turning his back and walking away, I thought that was the end of it. But a week later, I got a message on social media, a new, anonymous-looking account with no friends and no picture. "Is this Leo from Mark's party? It's Brian." And so it began. A slow burn of clandestine messages, then secret phone calls. Then the first nervous meeting for coffee in a place miles from either of our neighborhoods. He told me he was confused. He told me he cared about Chloe, that she was a good person, that their families were intertwined. But he also told me he'd never felt a connection like the one he felt with me. I was the first man he'd ever been attracted to, and it terrified him. I understood terror. I understood confusion. I told myself I could be patient. I told myself I was the one who was showing him who he really was. It felt noble in a way. I was his guide, his confidant, his secret harbor in a storm. I was so captivated by the role, so intoxicated by the intensity of our stolen time together, that I failed to see I wasn't building a harbor. I was building a cage for myself. The weeks bled into one another, each defined by the anticipation of the weekend. During the week, our communication was sparse a good morning text. "Hey, how's your day?" Call late at night when he was driving home from the gym, and Chloe thought he was just stuck in traffic. I became an expert at reading the subtext of his silences, at deciphering the mood in a 3-word text. My life became a waiting game, a long, empty hallway that only led to the door of his apartment. My own ambitions, my painting, my friendships, all took a back seat to the all-consuming drama of being Brian's secret. He was the sun I orbited, and I was burning up. The call came on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were usually dead air, a black hole in our limited communication schedule. Brian had a weekly team dinner with his firm, an event I knew was mandatory and always ran late. I was in my studio, a small, cluttered room at the back of my apartment, trying to lose myself in a large canvas. I was working on a series of cityscapes at night, all blurred lights and reflective, rain-slicked streets, anonymous, empty. A reflection of how I felt most of the time. My phone buzzed on the paint-splattered stool beside me, the screen lighting up with his name. My heart did a familiar, panicked leap. Call on a Tuesday could only mean one of two things. Something was very wrong or something had miraculously changed. "Brian," I answered, my voice tight with apprehension. "Leo?" "Hey." He sounded breathless, his words rushed. In the background, I could hear the muffled din of a crowded restaurant, the clatter of silverware, and distant laughter. "Listen, I can't talk for long. Is everything okay?" I asked, my brush frozen midair. "Yeah, no, it's fine. It's just, something's come up." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "My parents are having their anniversary party this Saturday. At their place, it's a big deal. The whole family, all their friends." My stomach dropped. I already knew where this was going. Our Saturdays were as sacred as our Sundays. They were our setup, the night we'd go to one of our designated dive bars or see a movie before retreating to the safety of his apartment. It was the one full night I had him. "Oh," I said, my voice flat. "So, you can't make it this weekend?" "No? I mean, yes, that's the thing," he stammered, his anxiety palpable even through the phone. "I have to be there. Chloe's going to be there, obviously. It's an all-day, all-night thing." "I get it, Brian. It's fine," I said, the lie tasting bitter. I started cleaning my brush in a jar of turpentine, the sharp, chemical smell filling the room. It was better to just accept it, to make it easy for him. That was my role. "No, wait," he said, his voice dropping lower, more conspiratorial. "That's not why I'm calling. Listen, The party is at my parents' house, but they've also booked a block of rooms at the Ridgemont Hotel for family flying in. It's just down the road from them. I stopped cleaning my brush. The Ridgemont, a sterile, upscale business hotel near the highway. It was a place with no history, no connection to his life. It was a perfectly anonymous space. Okay? I said slowly, not daring to hope. My sister and her husband were supposed to take one of the rooms, but their kid got sick, so they canceled, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. The room is still booked. It's paid for. It's empty. The unspoken invitation hung between us, shimmering and dangerous. Brian, what are you suggesting? I asked, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Have to be at the party. I have to make an appearance, be the good son, the good boyfriend. But it's going to go late. People will be drinking. No one will notice if I slip away for a few hours. He took a deep breath. Come to the hotel, room 312. I can get away around 11, maybe earlier. It was the boldest, most reckless thing he had ever proposed. It was taking our secret out of the safety of his carefully controlled apartment and moving it to the periphery of his real life, his family, his world. It was a crack in the foundation of the double life he had so meticulously built. Part of me was terrified. The other part, the part that had been starving for more than just Sunday morning scraps, was electrified. It felt like a promotion. It felt like, for once, he was choosing to take a risk for me. Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What if someone sees you? What if Chloe wonders where you are? I'll say I'm turning in early, that I have a headache. She's staying at my parents' house with them. She won't even know I'm gone, he insisted, a desperate edge to his voice. Please, Leo. I don't want to go the whole weekend without seeing you. Those were the magic words, the words that could make me agree to almost anything. He didn't want to go without seeing me. It was a flimsy branch, but I grabbed onto it with both hands. Okay, I said, my mind racing. Okay, Brian, I'll be there. A wave of audible relief washed through the phone line. Thank you, he breathed. Room 312, I'll text you when I'm on my way. And Leo, I'm always discreet, Brian, I said, the words falling from my lips before I could stop them. A flash of bitterness soured the excitement. My entire existence in his life was an exercise in discretion. I know you are. I'll see you Saturday, he said, and then the line went dead, leaving me in the sudden, echoing silence of my studio. I stood there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, my half-finished painting of a lonely street, staring back at me. This was different. It wasn't a planned, sterile Sunday. This was a clandestine meeting, a secret rendezvous in the middle of his most important family event. It was messy. It was dangerous. It felt like a turning point. For the first time in a long time, a sliver of genuine hope pushed through the cynicism. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe he was tired of the lies, tired of the distance. Maybe he was finally ready to start chipping away at the wall between his two worlds. Or maybe, a darker voice whispered in the back of my mind, he was just getting better at hiding things, more brazen in his deception. And I was so desperate for a taste of his real life that I was willing to be smuggled in through the back door of a hotel like contraband. The Ridgemont Hotel was an island of corporate anonymity, surrounded by a sea of manicured suburbia. Its clean, geometric lines and impersonal glass facade felt alien in a landscape of sprawling colonial houses and old money estates. It was the perfect place for a secret. There were no memories here, no ghosts of a life I wasn't part of. It was a blank slate. I followed Brian's instructions to the letter. I parked in the back of the lot, in a poorly lit corner behind a dumpster, my car hidden from the main entrance. I walked in through a side door, my heart thudding, a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The lobby was hushed and empty, except for a lone receptionist clicking away at a computer. I bypassed the front desk and went straight for the elevators, feeling like a spy in a cheap movie. My reflection in the polished brass doors was a stranger, a tense, pale-faced man holding a single keycard as if it were a bomb. Room 312 was identical to every other mid-range hotel room in existence. 2 queen beds with stiff, patterned comforters, a generic print of a sailboat on the wall, and a lingering scent of industrial-grade air freshener. It was profoundly, depressingly impersonal. I dropped my overnight bag on the bed farthest from the door and walked to the window. From here, I could just see the glow of lights from a large house down the road, music and laughter faint on the wind. The party, his world, it was right there a few hundred yards away, and I was here, waiting in the wings. The waiting was the worst part. An hour ticked by, then another. I tried to read the book I'd brought, but the words blurred together. I paced the length of the room, my footsteps muffled by the corporate-grade carpet. With every passing minute, my initial thrill curdled into a familiar, sour anxiety. I checked my phone every 30 seconds, but the screen remained dark. He was with her, laughing, dancing, holding her hand, introducing her to family friends as my girlfriend, Chloe. The thought was a physical pain, a twisting in my gut. What was I doing here? I was a dirty little secret, hiding in a hotel room, waiting for a man who was living a whole other life just down the street. The nobility I had once felt in my role as his confidant now just felt pathetic. I was just about to give up, to pack my bag and slip back out into the night, when my phone finally buzzed. Brian. 5 minutes. Relief, sharp and shameful, washed over me. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it was overshadowed by a desperate, electric anticipation. I quickly went into the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and tried to smooth my hair. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. When I heard the soft click of the key card in the door, I forced a smile onto my face, ready to play my part. The man who walked in was not the relaxed, easygoing Brian of our Sunday mornings. This was a stranger, wearing his face. He was still in his party clothes, a tailored blue shirt, dark trousers, but his collar was unbuttoned, and his hair was slightly disheveled. He looked wired, his eyes wide, and scanning the room as if he expected to be followed. "Hey," he breathed, closing the door quickly behind him and leaning against it, as if to barricade us from the outside world. "Hey," I said softly. "You made it." He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides and pulled me into a fierce, almost frantic hug. He smelled of expensive cologne, champagne, and something else, the scent of the party of his other life. He buried his face in my neck, and I could feel the tension radiating from him in waves. "God, I'm so glad you're here," he mumbled into my skin. His hands were roaming my back, my arms, as if to reassure himself that I was real. This was what I had been waiting for. This was the validation. I held him back just as tightly, my own anxiety melting away in the face of his desperation. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Was it hard to get away?" He pulled back, running a hand through his hair. It was a nightmare. My dad cornered me, wanted to talk about my 5-year plan. My mom kept trying to get a photo of me and Chloe for the mantelpiece. It was a lot. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and something else I couldn't quite read. "I just needed to get out. I needed to see you." He kissed me then, a kiss that was nothing like our slow, tender Sunday morning kisses. This was hungry, desperate, fueled by adrenaline and guilt. It was a kiss that sought to erase the last few hours, to block out the world outside this room. I responded with equal fervor, channeling all my pent-up loneliness and frustration into the embrace. For a little while, it worked. In the sterile anonymity of room 312, we created our own bubble. We fell onto the bed, a tangle of limbs and hurried whispers. We made love with a desperate intensity that bordered on angry. It was less about intimacy and more about a mutual need for escape. For him, it was an escape from the pressure of his life. For me, it was an escape from the reality of my position in it. Afterward, we lay in the dark, the sheets a mess around us. The silence returned, but it wasn't comfortable. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a hollow, aching space behind. "You should have seen my dad tonight," Brian said quietly, his voice flat. He gave this whole toast to my mom, to their life together, about building something real, something honest. He let out a bitter little laugh. Honest. I didn't know what to say. I just lay there, my hand resting on his chest, feeling the slow, steady beat of his heart. He turned his head on the pillow to look at me. "What are we doing, Leo?" he whispered, and the question was so full of genuine pain that it stole the air from my lungs. "I don't know, Brian," I answered, and it was the most honest thing I'd said to him in months. He was about to say something else, but his phone, which he'd left on the nightstand, lit up. The screen illuminated his face, casting it in a sickly blue light. My eyes were drawn to it instinctively. A name glowed on the screen. Chloe. Underneath it, a message preview. Everything okay? Your mom was asking where you went. Brian flinched, as if he'd been burned. He snatched the phone, his body instantly tensing, pulling away from me without even realizing it. The bubble was shattered. Her name, her presence, had invaded our sanctuary. He sat up on the edge of the bed, his back to me, and started typing a reply. In that moment, the geography of our relationship had never been clearer. He was facing her, and I was behind him, in the dark. The crack in the foundation hadn't been a chance for the light to get in. It had just been a way for the darkness to spread. And as I watched his thumbs fly across the screen, lying to the woman he was supposed to love, I felt a cold, hard certainty settle in my stomach. This was never going to work. This was going to end, and it was going to be ugly. The aftermath of that night in the hotel was a subtle but significant shift in our dynamic. The desperation and guilt that had fueled our encounter seemed to leave a residue, a fine layer of dust that settled over everything. Our subsequent Sundays felt different, strained. The easy intimacy we once shared was now punctuated by long, awkward silences. Ryan was more distant, more preoccupied, his phone never far from his hand. The lie, which had once been a bearable weight, was now a crushing, unmanageable burden for both of us. I started to pull back, a slow, painful retreat. I stopped initiating texts. I made excuses, claiming I was busy with a new art commission, lie of my own to skip one of our weekends. Part of me hoped my distance would provoke a reaction, that he would fight for us, that he would finally be forced to make a choice. But he just seemed relieved. My absence made his life easier, and that realization was a new kind of agony. The breaking point came, as it always seems to, on a day that started out perfectly ordinary. It was a Thursday afternoon, about 2 weeks after the hotel incident. I was at a downtown art supply store, stocking up on canvases. It was a rare trip, for me, into the heart of the minefield, but my usual supplier was out of the specific size I needed. I was in the oil paint aisle, debating between 2 shades of cerulean blue, when I heard a laugh that was as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. My blood ran cold. I froze, my hand hovering over a tube of paint. Slowly, I peered through the narrow gap between the shelves, and there he was, Brian. He was standing by the checkout counter, dressed in his work clothes, his briefcase slung over his shoulder. He looked happy, relaxed, a million miles away from the tortured man who had whispered, "What are we doing?" In a dark hotel room, and he wasn't alone, standing next to him, her hand linked casually through his arm, was a woman. She was beautiful, but not in the intimidating way I had imagined. She had a kind, open face, warm eyes, and long blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She was laughing at something he'd said, a genuine, unrestrained laugh. She was real. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, all the air forced from my lungs. Seeing her in a photograph was one thing. Seeing her like this alive, breathing, touching the man I loved with an easy public intimacy I had never known was a visceral, gut-wrenching trauma. They looked so normal, so right. A perfect, happy couple running errands on a Thursday afternoon. I was the anomaly, the glitch in their perfect code. I ducked back behind the shelf, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted to run, to become invisible, but my feet were glued to the floor. I watched them through the gap, a voyeur, to the life I was systematically excluded from. He leaned down and kissed her, a quick, affectionate peck on the temple. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss like ours. It was a kiss of comfort, of familiarity. It was the kiss of a real relationship. And then the universe decided to play its cruelest trick. "Oh, I almost forgot," Chloe said, her voice clear and bright. "I need to grab some graphite pencils for my sister. Be right back." She turned and started walking down the aisle. My aisle, panic seized me. There was nowhere to go. The aisle was a dead end. I was trapped. I turned my back, pretending to be intensely interested in a display of charcoal sticks, my shoulders hunched, praying she would just walk past me. I could feel her approaching, her footsteps light on the linoleum floor. It just stopped, just a few feet away. I held my breath, studying the packaging on a box of charcoal as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "Excuse me?" a soft voice said. I flinched, but didn't turn. Maybe she's talking to someone else, I thought wildly. "Excuse me," she said again, a little louder this time. "Sorry to bother you, but could you reach that box for me? The one on the top shelf? It was happening." This was the collision I had spent 2 years trying to avoid. Slowly, like a man walking to his own execution. I turned around. Her friendly smile faltered for a split second as she looked at me. A tiny flicker of confusion crossed her face. Maybe she'd seen a picture of me on Mark's social media from that party ages ago. Or maybe it was nothing, just a reaction to my own pale, terrified expression. "Oh, sorry," she said, recovering. Quickly, "I just can't quite reach it." My mind was a screaming white void. My hands felt numb. I looked from her kind, unsuspecting face to the box of pencils on the high shelf, and beyond her, I could see Brian at the front of the store, scrolling through his phone, completely oblivious. The entire geography of my life, the carefully separated continents of his world and mine, had just collided in the middle of an art supply store. I reached up, my arm trembling slightly, and grabbed the box. As I handed it to her, our fingers brushed. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, undiluted guilt. "Thank you so much," she said, giving me a warm, grateful smile. It was a beautiful smile. I hated it. I hated her for being so effortlessly good and kind. I hated Brian for putting her in this position. Most of all, I hated myself for being a part of it. "You're welcome," I managed to choke out my voice, sounding like it belonged to someone else. She turned to leave, and in that moment, Brian looked up from his phone, his face breaking into that easy, charming smile as he saw her approaching. He called out. "Yep," she sang back. "A very nice man helped me." And then Brian's eyes, those kind blue eyes I knew so well, shifted from her to me. The smile on his face didn't just vanish. It shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of gray. His eyes widened in pure, abject terror. He looked at me, then at Chloe, then back at me, the silent, panicked calculations firing behind his eyes. He looked like a man who had just seen 2 ghosts from different lives appear in the same room, and in his eyes I saw it all, the whole sordid truth, the fear, the shame, and the undeniable soul-crushing fact that in this collision I was the one he saw as the wreckage. Time seemed to warp in the fluorescent hum of the art supply store. The moment Brian's eyes locked on mine stretched into an eternity. In that single silent exchange, the entire fragile architecture of our secret world came crashing down. The look on his face wasn't just fear. It was the horrified recognition of a man watching his carefully compartmentalized lives bleed into one another, staining everything. Chloe, oblivious, reached the counter. "All set," she said cheerfully, placing the pencils next to the other. Items Brian had gathered. She glanced back at him, her smile faltering slightly as she registered his stricken expression. "Brian, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." His eyes darted from me to her, a trapped animal looking for an escape route. I think I left my wallet in the car," he stammered, the lie clumsy and transparent. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt to flee the scene, to put distance between the 2 irreconcilable pieces of his life. But I wasn't going to let him. Something inside me, a part that had been dormant and accommodating for 2 long years, finally snapped. I was done being the discreet secret, the ghost, who disappears on command. The shame and hurt on his face ignited a cold, hard anger in my own chest. I took a deliberate step out of the aisle, placing myself in Chloe's line of sight. I held Brian's gaze, my expression unreadable, my heart pounding a furious, defiant rhythm. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. My very presence was an accusation. Brian's panic escalated. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He knew I wasn't going to just fade away this time. Chloe looked from Brian's pale face to mine, and the confusion in her eyes began to curdle into suspicion. The air grew thick with unspoken questions. She was a pediatric nurse. She was trained to read people, to notice when something was deeply wrong. The friendly smile was gone, replaced by a guarded, questioning frown. "Do you two, know each other?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. The question was a detonator. Brian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, "Don't." They begged, "Please, don't." He was asking me to protect him, to protect her, to swallow the poison one last time so he wouldn't have to. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't do it. My silence had been my complicity. It was time for the truth. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension. I looked directly at Brian. "We know each other." Chloe's head whipped around to look at him, her eyes wide. "Brian, what is he talking about?" The unraveling was swift and brutal. Brian just stood there, paralyzed, as the lie he had so carefully constructed disintegrated around him. He couldn't deny it. He couldn't explain it. He just stared at the floor, a condemned man waiting for the sentence to be read. I didn't need to say anything more. The truth was there, hanging in the space between us, ugly and undeniable. It was in my steady gaze, in Brian's ashen face, in the sudden, sickening understanding that dawned in Chloe's eyes. I saw the exact moment she put the pieces together. The flicker of recognition from the party, the frantic secrecy in Brian's eyes, my challenging presence. It all clicked into place. Her face crumpled. It wasn't a loud, dramatic breakdown. It was a quiet, devastating implosion. The color drained from her cheeks, and her hands, which had been resting on the counter, clenched into tight fists. She looked at Brian, her expression a maelstrom of confusion, betrayal, and a pain so profound it was hard to witness. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Oh, Brian." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just picked up her purse from the counter, her movements stiff and robotic, and turned. Without another word, without another look at either of us, she walked out of the store. The little bell above the door chimed a small, cheerful sound that was grotesquely out of place. The silence she left behind was deafening. It was just me and Brian standing amidst the ruins of his life. He finally looked at me, and the expression on his face was not one of anger, but of utter, hollowed-out despair. He looked broken. "You didn't have to do that," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Yes, I did," I said, the cold anger giving way to a deep, bone-weary sadness. "And so did you, Brian, a long time ago." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there by the checkout counter. I didn't buy my canvases. I just walked out of the store, the bell chiming my exit, and stepped out into the bright, indifferent sunlight. I didn't look back. The drive home was quiet. I didn't need angry music. This time, the silence was filled with a strange and terrible peace. It was the peace of a ceasefire after a long and bloody war. It was over. The lie was dead. My phone started buzzing in my pocket about 10 minutes later. It was him. I ignored it. It buzzed. Again and again. A string of texts followed, frantic, pleading, angry, and sad. I pulled over to the side of the road, took a deep breath, and blocked his number. That night, for the first time in 2 years, I slept without waiting for a text. I woke up on a Sunday morning to an apartment that felt entirely my own. The silence wasn't a void waiting to be filled by him. It was a space I could finally fill with myself. The ache was still there, a deep, resonant grief for the man I had loved and the illusion I had clung to, but for the first time, it felt clean. It wasn't tangled up in lies and shame. I was no longer his secret. I was just me. And as I stood in my studio, the morning sun slanting through the windows, I picked up a fresh canvas. I didn't know what I was going to paint, but I knew it wouldn't be a blurred, empty street at night. It would be something in the light of day.